In the heart of South Auckland lies Otara, a suburb that's been called a lot of names. Tin City, area code 274. The place newspapers once called a crime-ridden ghetto, and it's also where one of the country's most notorious gangs was born. The Killer Beez. They started in 2003, not as one of the old motorcycle clubs like the Mongrel Mob or Black Power, but as a new kind of crew. Inspired by American-style street gangs, they wear black, yellow, and white colors, throw up gang signs, and rep their set through music. What began as a feeder crew for the Tribesmen MC turned into something much bigger, controlling meth, terrorizing neighborhoods, and sparking a gang war that put Auckland schools in lockdown. This is the story of the New Zealand Killer Beez. You can't really understand the Killer Beez without first understanding where they came from, and that means understanding Otara. By the early 2000s, it had become one of Auckland's poorest areas. The 2006 census painted a pretty grim picture. The median income was just $16,450, way below the national average of $24,400. We're talking about a deprivation rate of 94%, high unemployment, overcrowded homes, and not a lot of opportunities if you were a young Pacific Islander or Maori kid growing up there. Sully Paya worked with troubled youth for 25 years, and the way he described it was chilling. He said they'd already lost one generation to the gangs, and the kids he was working with now, 14, 15, 16-year-olds, some of them were already hardcore and gone. That's the reality of what was happening in South Auckland. The Tribesmen had been around since the 1980s, a predominantly Maori motorcycle club that started right there in Otara. But by the early 2000s, they were facing a problem. The whole outlaw motorcycle club thing was losing its appeal, and young people weren't interested in Harleys and leather cuts anymore. What they were into was something completely different, that glamorized gang lifestyle coming straight out of America. That's where Josh Masters comes in. Masters was the vice president of the Tribesmen at the time, and he understood what young people actually wanted. So in 2003, he allegedly founded the Killer Beez as a feeder gang for the Tribesmen. The strategy was simple: recruit young members through a gang that spoke their language, get them trained up, prove themselves, then they could move up to the Tribesmen MC. There's a good chance the gang's name is a reference to the Killer Beez from the Wu-Tang Clan, the notorious hip-hop group from Staten Island, New York. They had a whole collective of affiliated rappers they called the Wu-Tang Killer Beez. The gang adopted the skull fingers up emblem, basically a skeletal middle finger pointing straight up with the thumb partially extended, always made of exactly 13 bones. The Killer Beez started recruiting right there in Otara, targeting kids from local schools and youth who were already on the edges. They promised protection, brotherhood, and a way out of poverty. By 2007, Otara Senior Sergeant Andrew Berryman was calling the Killer Beez the most visible gang in South Auckland, who were also described as a significant problem. The Killer Beez didn't stay contained to Otara, though. They spread fast across South Auckland, into West Auckland, up to Northland, especially Kaikohe. They even tried establishing a presence on Auckland's North Shore, which hadn't really dealt with gang problems like the rest of Auckland had. They made headlines for all the wrong reasons. They were linked to savage bashings of couples on Auckland's North Shore. A house shooting in Otara left one victim losing an eye. They used standover tactics against businesses, targeting laptops because they had connections to receivers. And when they took over a former scout hall in Otara, they used it for organized fights. In 2006, after a spate of killings, the gang became one of the few youth street gangs in New Zealand to achieve longevity. Most gangs of this type were short-lived, forming overnight and disappearing just as quickly. They even established their own feeder gangs like the Troublesome and the Bud-Smoking Thugs, which fed members into the Killer Beez. In 2007, Josh Masters started a record label called Colorway Records. Colorway Records put out music videos with all the gang imagery you'd expect: yellow bandanas obscuring faces, the raised middle finger emblem, and lyrics celebrating the lifestyle. Their biggest release was Put Your Colors On, and in 2008 they released a full album titled Skull Fingers Up. Masters and his crew positioned themselves as offering Auckland's youth a legitimate path forward through music, entrepreneurship, and culture. but not everyone was buying it. Detective Inspector John Timms saw through the facade. He said they tried to portray themselves as modern-day Robin Hoods, using music and videos to connect with young people. He said that based on the evidence, they are drug dealers who are causing destruction and chaos in the community by their actions. Then came 2008. Masters sat down with journalist John Campbell for a prime-time Campbell Live interview. When Campbell asked about the gang's involvement with methamphetamine, Masters was adamant, saying that they were against it and that they hated it. He said there are 3 rules in the Killer Bees: no smoking pea, staying fit, and staying loyal. He said in order to become a Killer Bee, all you had to do was hang with them. There were no ritual initiations to join. But at the time of that interview, a covert police investigation called Operation Leo was already underway. Between February and May 2008, police intercepted more than 110,000 communications. They were building a case that would bring down the entire organization. What they uncovered was a sophisticated methamphetamine operation, but we'll get to that later. Before Operation Leo could make its arrests, a tragedy struck. On June 16, 2008, Joanne Wang took her 8-year-old son to a shopping center after school. When they got back to their car, a man snatched her handbag. She chased after him. The thief was Christopher Shadrock, a 23-year-old Killer Beez member. As Joanne chased him through the parking lot, he jumped into a stolen white Nissan. Joanne tried to stop the car from leaving. The vehicle hit Joanne, dragged her underneath, and ran her over. She passed in the parking lot while her son stood there and watched. Police arrested 7 people. Shadrock got life in prison with 12 years minimum. 5 other Killer Beez members were convicted of helping destroy evidence and torch the stolen car. The murder sparked anti-violence rallies across South Auckland, and Operation Leo was about to blow the Killer Bees wide open. 3 months after the Campbell Live interview and weeks after Joanne Wang's murder, police struck. On May 28, 2008, Operation Leo hit both the Killer Bees and Tribesmen MC. Josh Masters and 43 others were arrested in coordinated raids across Auckland and Waikato. In total, 60 Killer Bees members were taken into custody. Police had intercepted 110,000 communications, calls, texts, coded conversations. They seized $500,000 worth of meth and cannabis, $20,000 cash, stolen property, vehicles, and colorway records itself. According to the New Zealand Herald, Masters was denied bail and spent 4 years in custody before pleading guilty to supplying meth, conspiracy, and money laundering. He got 10 years and 5 months. The Killer Bees then wreaked havoc inside New Zealand's prisons. On May 15, 2010, at Spring Hill Prison, Killer Bees member Latu Kepu took the life of guard Jason Palmer with a single punch. Palmer fell, hit his head on concrete, and passed. Kepu was convicted of manslaughter. They were also involved in a major Spring Hill riot in 2013. The most brutal attack came on October 19, 2016, at Paramoremo, New Zealand's only maximum security facility. A group of inmates launched an attack on guards in C Block. 6 guards were attacked, 3 stabbed in their heads, necks, hands, and shoulders. Inmates widely believed the Killer Bees planned and carried out the attack. By 2013, gang members made up over 30% of New Zealand's prison population, and by 2015, the Killer Bees were the 4th largest prison gangs with 167 affiliates, right behind the Mongrel Mob, Black Power, and the Crips. They weren't just in Auckland anymore, they were expanding their reach to facilities nationwide. Josh Masters walked free in July 2018 after serving nearly 10.5 years behind bars. By then, the Killer Bees had grown to over 300 members, making them the 4th largest gang in New Zealand. But Masters' relationship with the Tribesmen, the motorcycle club that had originally spawned the Killer Bees, had soured. Sources said the Tribesmen wanted Masters to patch over, to fold the Killer Bees back under their control, but Masters allegedly refused. The Bees had outgrown their creators, and the young cub could no longer be trained by the older lion. Then came April 26, 2019. Masters showed up at the Auckland Harley-Davidson dealership in Mount Wellington. There, he crossed paths with Okusitino Te, once a close friend, a founding Killer Bees member, now wearing Tribesman colors. Te pulled a 9mm pistol and fired. The bullet tore through Masters' arm and into his spine. The gun jammed when Te tried to fire again. Masters was left paralyzed for life. A few hours later, Tay turned himself into the police and received 7 years. Neither man ever told police what really happened that day, and maybe they didn't need to. In 2022, the feud exploded into tit-for-tat shootings and firebombings across Auckland. The killer Beez and the Tribesmen had managed to coexist in uneasy peace. Years had passed without open warfare, though everyone knew the tension never really went away. It just simmered under the surface. Both claimed historical ties to Otara, both had families, business interests, and reputations staked in Auckland. But in March 2022, that fragile peace finally cracked. It apparently started when Killer Beez members were believed to have shot at an address where tribesmen were celebrating after a patching ceremony. Weeks later, Beez members were mocked online by the tribesmen after a filmed motorway crash in Auckland. A senior Killer Beez member then turned up at rugby league practice with a firearm to threaten a tribesman member. The confrontation never happened, but it was the catalyst. On May 24, 2022, 7 shootings occurred across Auckland in one night. But that was just the beginning. What authorities initially thought might blow over actually got worse. By June 10th, police attributed 21 shootings and 9 arsons to the escalating conflict. Homes got torched, bullets flew at the wrong addresses, and somehow nobody died. At one Henderson house, 2 Beez members opened fire, thinking a tribesman rival still lived there. He didn't. His kids and ex-partner did. An infant and an 8-year-old were asleep inside when rounds tore through the walls. When one of the shooters was later caught on a prison call talking about it, he showed zero remorse, saying that kids and all will get it. Police launched Operation Dairyland, and within 2 weeks, they'd arrested 19 people affiliated with both groups, seized 9 firearms, and 341 rounds of ammunition. But even with cops all over the streets, the shootings kept happening. Then it got political. National Party leader Christopher Luxon publicly called for Police Minister Poto Williams to be removed from her role, saying she wasn't providing leadership during the crisis. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern eventually stripped Williams of the police portfolio in a June cabinet reshuffle, admitting Williams had lost focus. And then, when it seemed like the war wasn't going to slow down, something shifted. Peace talks were held over the weekend of June 11th through 12th in 2022 between senior leaders of both the Tribesmen and Killer Beez. However, the truce apparently came with conditions. The Killer Beez weren't allowed to wear their patches in Otara anymore, the very suburb both groups claimed as their spiritual home. The truce did hold, for the most part. No shootings or fires linked to the conflict occurred in the week after the truce, though tensions remained high. A few months later, in October 2022, both groups came together publicly for the first time to honor Roy Katine, a founding tribesman member who'd passed away. The joint funeral procession was a sign that maybe the worst was over. Of course, not everyone got the memo. Days into the ceasefire, a Killer Beez member in prison plotted to assassinate a tribesman rival known as Sweet. The plan involved a hit on the outside. Prison phone calls picked up the whole thing. He has to be smoked, eh? The instructions came through, but other Killer Beez members found out and apparently beat the hitman to stop him from blowing the truce. The Killer Beez leadership shut it down. Even with a truce, the drug trade keeps rolling. In August 2025, Customs and police intercepted 124 kilograms of meth concealed in machine parts shipped from Canada, worth millions on the street. Operation Volt started after authorities flagged suspicious packages linked to the Killer Beez. Turns out that they had been running dry runs, empty shipments sent in June to test border security before the real load came through. When police raided 5 Auckland addresses, they found the group had already hired a rental truck and forklift ready to receive and distribute. 7 people were arrested. The aftermath is still playing out in the courts. The cases keep trickling through. Conspiracy charges, firearms offenses, all stemming from those 3 weeks. Both groups are still active today and the violence hasn't stopped. It's just more contained than those wild weeks in 2022. The truce held, but the scars are still there. And everyone knows that beneath the surface, the tension never really goes away. It just waits.